What's going on, guys? It's me, Zach, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. In this one, I'm going to go over my top 10 tight ends presented as a tier list, along with a couple of tight ends I've been targeting as late round dart throws. Before we get into the video, though, I do want to take a minute to thank you guys for all the support we've been getting. We did manage to break the subscriber goal I set of 200 by the start of the season. That's pretty crazy. I can't believe we managed to do that. I really didn't. I think I set 100 as the goal before we all started all this, so that's pretty awesome. Let's see if we can get to 300 by the start of the season. Probably not, but let's shoot for it, right? So yeah, if you are new to the channel, I really do appreciate you stopping by. I hope I can help you win your league this season, at least play a part in that journey for you. Um, so yes, if this is your first time here, please do feel free to like any video, subscribe to the channel if you get anything from it, and click the bell so you get notifications when I create a video. I upload 3 videos at a minimum each week, so we should be very active throughout the course of the season. And like I said, feel free to ask me any questions you have in the comments. I do a good job of getting back to as many of you guys as I can. So, once again, I just want to thank you guys for all of the support, and I hope you enjoy the video. Starting off with Tier 1, I think I've got pretty much what the consensus would be in terms of the Tier 1 at the tight end position this season. Many people will have a difference in terms of their tight end 1 and tight end 2, but really we are just splitting hairs here. I absolutely love both of these players. I think that Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews are poised to have massive seasons, and there's really only one tight end I see that could even crack the top 2 other than these two if they manage to stay healthy throughout the course of the season. I do give the slight edge to Travis Kelce this season. I think he's going to have a very massive role in what looks to be a more pass-heavy and more dominant offense than Mark Andrews is going to play a part in. But I do think that they're both pretty relatively decent values in auction drafts this season. I do find myself leaving with Kelce more often than Mark Andrews in auction drafts, but I do find that I end up taking Travis Kelce far less often in snake drafts because he does go quite a bit higher by ADP. So Mark Andrews tends to be the guy I managed to get more of in snake drafts because I like targeting him at the end of round 2. Like I said, both these guys are really great players. They're not going to be, by any means, the reason you don't win your championship if you draft them. I love them a lot. I think that there's maybe a case to be made that you can get a better value with one of the tier 2 or tier 3 guys that I mentioned, but I tend to be targeting both these guys pretty heavily in most of my drafts. I'm probably overexposed to both Kelce and Andrews, but I think that having a very dominant tight end helps you win your league pretty often. It gives you a really crazy positional advantage throughout the whole course of the season, and none of these guys, especially in auction draft, cost enough to me that it's not worth at least taking a look at them in all of your auction drafts. And if the ADP plays itself out right, I think that they're worth a dart throw, or not necessarily a dart throw, but they're worth taking the stab at and paying the price for in a snake draft as well. Moving to tier 2, I did try really hard to try and put Kyle Pitts into either tier with Kelce and Andrews, or a tier with the 3 players I have in tier 3, but I really didn't think that he fit in any of the categories that those players do. I think that he is the only tight end outside of Kelce and Andrews that has a legitimate shot of being your number 1 tight end at the end of the season, but I also think that there's too much unknown for me to include him in that tier with those two. So for that reason, I did have to put him into his own tier. In tier 2, I have him as the tight end 3 off the board. His ADP is the tight end 3. But what I did notice is that I'm willing to pay about 15% of my auction budget for Kyle Pitts. That might be a little high, but I think that it's relatively cheap compared to what you end up paying for Andrews and Kelce. And that is still way over his average cost by Fantasy Pros auction calculator. So I think that Kyle Pitts, especially in auction drafts, is a really great value this season. I've sort of touched on him as one of the players who ended up being the most undervalued in auction drafts compared to Snake. So Kyle Pitts is certainly a player I'm leaving a lot of auction drafts with, and I think that even in a Snake draft, I love getting him at either the end of the 3rd or the early part of the 4th round. Kyle Pitts is an absolute freak. He's going to be at least the top 3 tight end this season, and he really does have a chance to break a lot of records at the tight end position. I think for him, it's not if, but when he breaks out and ends up being the tight end 1 over the course of the season. I am a little bit worried about Marcus Mariota being his quarterback, but Mariota supported Delanie Walker for years, and Kyle Pitts is much better than Delanie Walker. So shoot your shot on Kyle Pitts. I think he does have a shot to be the tight end 1 this season. You don't have to pay that price. So Kyle Pitts does seem to be a player that I think has the potential to be one of the better values in drafts this season. Moving into tier 3, I have Dalton Schultz, George Kittle, and Darren Waller as my tight ends 4, 5, and 6. That is compared to an ADP of tight end 6 for Dalton Schultz, tight end 4 for George Kittle, and tight end 5 of Darren Waller. This was a pretty recent development for me in terms of moving Waller behind these two. In fact, even just a couple days ago, I would have said Waller was my tight end 4, followed by Schultz and Kittle. But I'm a little bit concerned about Waller and his hamstring injury that's kept him out of a lot of training camp. There are rumors that most of his absence from training camp could be contract related. If it does turn out that's the case, then I think that a lot of my concerns for him would go away. But even still, he's missing a lot of valuable time to learn a new offense with the new coaching staff there. So that would be why I'm the lowest on Waller here. I do think that Waller also probably possesses the highest upside of these three, but I just don't want to spend the high draft capital on a tight end that I think might either miss several games this season or just not be as involved as we want him to be. There's a legitimate shot that he ends up being the number 3 target in that offense, and I just don't want to. I don't want to put myself in a position where I'm spending draft capital on a player that might be a bust pretty much right away. That's just too risky for me. I think that Dalton Schultz has a legitimate shot to be the number 2 receiving option in Dallas, and he's also the cheapest of these three, so he tends to be the guy that I leave most of my drafts with if I miss out on a tier 1 or tier 2 player. And George Kittle, for me, he's a totally fine value. I think he's going to regress a little bit with Trey Lance under center. He might be a little bit less consistent because I think Trey Lance is going to throw the ball deep more and at a lower volume. So there's going to be a lot more spike weeks for Kittle, but also a lot more weeks where he doesn't get the targets that you need him to be successful. At the same time, all three of these guys, I'm not willing to pay what their average cost comes out to be, but I find that in general, if you do miss out on any of these guys, then you will be lacking at the tight end position throughout the course of the season, barring getting lucky on one of those late round dart throws that we'll talk about later. But so I don't necessarily mind taking Dalton Schultz in the 6th round or Kittle or Waller in the 5th, but I think that especially in auction drafts, unless you can get them at a value, I'm generally passing on this tier. Moving into tight end 4 here, I think this is where we sort of started to enter what I call the tight end dead zone. You do hear a lot about the running back dead zone in drafts, and I don't think that the tight end dead zone is necessarily something that's talked about enough. These are the tight ends that I think end up getting drafted relatively high because players feel like they don't want to leave their draft without a tight end, so they get to the point where they don't have one and they just take the next best one on the board. But none of these guys really end up contributing to your team in terms of winning a fantasy championship, and most of these guys are going to perform hardly better than the guys you can stream off the waiver wire. So again, this ends up being a tier that I end up pretty much completely avoiding. The caveat to that would be that I do think that in auction drafts, you can still get these guys for cheap enough that you don't end up spending a very high draft capital compared to what you have to spend to get these guys in a snake draft. So in auction drafts, I'm more than okay leaving a draft with one of these guys. The guy I do end up with the most of is Zach Ertz because I think that at least the first 6 weeks of the season, he might be worthy of being considered as a tier 3 player, and then I think he's a guy that you can move off of before Hopkins comes back. So if you do draft Zach Ertz, that would be my approach with him, is to use him for the first 4 or 5 weeks, and then before Hopkins comes back, try and ship him off so he still has some perceived value left in him. The last guy I do want to talk about here is Cole Kmet. I do have him ranked 3 spots above ADP as my tight end 10. I really think that Cole Kmet's going to have a really awesome year this season. He's pretty clearly the number 2 target in the Chicago Bears offense, and even though that offense is going to be pretty anemic, I think that there's going to be enough volume for Cole Kmet to really succeed. He was one of 2 players in the NFL last year with 90-plus targets who didn't score a touchdown. There's going to be some positive touchdown regression for Cole Kmet, especially without Jimmy Graham there. And I think that Cole Kmet, again, you can get him really late in your draft or for a really low percentage of your auction value. And he's the cheapest of these options, and I think that there's reason for optimism for him to even squeak into that top 6 or 7 at the position just because of the volume he's going to get. And if he gets lucky in the touchdown department, he really could have a bit of a breakout year. Before letting you guys go, I wanted to touch on 3 tight ends that I have ranked outside of my top 10, but I think have really reasonable reasons for optimism in terms of seeing them finish way higher than their ADP and potentially being very real fantasy contributors. Number 1 for me here is Gerald Everett. I actually have him ranked as my tight end 12 despite a consensus ranking of tight end 21. Obviously, I'm saying that you should pay 1% of your auction value for him because he is free, so there's no reason to pay more than that. But Gerald Everett looks pretty set to be the number 4 receiving option on the LA Chargers offense behind Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, and Austin Eckler. You could maybe make a case for Joshua Palmer sliding in there as well, but Gerald Everett's going to be involved in this offense. He's the best tight end they've had in a while, and they managed to make Jared Cook pretty relevant last year. I believe Cook finished as the tight end 11 on a points per game basis, and he got quite a bit of targets, and though he could do absolutely nothing with the ball in his hands after the catch, that's something that Gerald Everett's really going to bring to this offense. I think that Gerald Everett is going to be, at a minimum, better than what Jared Cook was last year, and Jared Cook was a top 12 tight end, and on top of that, there's a very real world where Gerald Everett falls in the end zone quite a bit. I don't think I'd be shocked to hear that at the end of the season, Gerald Everett has 10 plus touchdowns. And in that scenario, you could even see Gerald Everett cracking in the top 5. Gerald Everett has been a player that a lot of people have been really high on for a while, and he just hasn't been able to really put it all together. But he's certainly got the athleticism to be elite, and tight end's kind of a weird position in the NFL. It can often take players a long time to really figure it out. So Gerald Everett's got a lot of reasons for optimism here. The other two I want to talk about are Dawson Knox and Evan Ingram. I do actually have Dawson Knox ranked below consensus ADP, but just by one spot. And I think that even with that in mind, I think that Dawson Knox is another one of those tight ends that has an outside shot at 10 touchdowns. He's tied to an elite quarterback in an elite offense. And if the Gabe Davis hype is incorrect or something happens to one of the top 2 receivers there, Dawson Knox really could be the number 2 target here. And I think that at worst, he might be the number 3. You could make an argument that Isaiah McKenzie as well could slide him down to the 4th target, but regardless, Dawson Knox is going to be involved in this offense. He's pretty talented, and I think that there's just going to be enough volume around in that offense that Dawson Knox could certainly spike some weeks. And then last, I do want to talk about Evan Ingram some, sort of in line with Gerald Everett. Evan Ingram has all of the physical skills to be an elite fantasy player, but he just hasn't really been able to put it all together. He's had a lot of problems with drops in his career, but he finds himself in Jacksonville with Trevor Lawrence, who really did target the tight end quite a bit last season. Again, you can get Evan Ingram for free in your drafts, and there's a world where Evan Ingram gets a really reasonable target share in an offense that we expect to improve this season. And Evan Ingram, again, is a guy that can do a lot with the ball in his hands after the catch. He's another guy that could really put up a couple of spike weeks this year and really be at least a nice waiver wire addition for a few weeks during the course of the season, and even more possibly if Trevor Lawrence really does take that step forward that we're hoping for. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.